I can't, but it's all I know is that I got this little scam they've developed here over a length of a long time. We got it dissected and analyzed, and we found the remedy and the way out of their little maze. And it's mighty powerful, and a lot of people don't see it or want to see it or can't see it. Yeah. I don't know about that. I can't help that.
Again, we've got the feds laying down, and we're still hacking away at the local fiefdoms, but we'll get there.
Well, we'll get there. We'll know we're in tyranny and confront it, one of the two. And I love to get these things down to an either-or situation. It's either this or it's that. And that makes things so simplistic, doesn't it?
Yeah. Not to add any racial bent into it, dude. It's either black or white. It's either free or you're a slave.
That's pretty much it. Unfortunately, it's been pitted and set up and framed in this ethnic situation, and it's not. It's not that. It's a political situation. So anyway, let's see. It's the Saturday show. Mentioned that already. We were going to start out and go over the 13th and 14th Amendment. I was going to do it primarily for the newer people. You guys, some of you have heard this before, obviously. But it's important that I think the new folks know that. So I was hoping that Ken and Demetrius would be with us. And are either one of you two with us today?
I am. This is Ken.
Hey, Ken. Good morning.
How are you?
Getting up early in California. Not too bad.
Yeah, it's a good way to start the day.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day in Ecuador today. We've had a little, it's been very nice here. We've had a regular summer for a change. The last 2 years, there was a La Nina sitting offshore and totally screwed up the summer. We didn't start summer till the middle of July a couple of years ago. And it's a distinct difference in seasons, even though we're on the equator, interestingly enough. And even though I'm south of the equator by a smidge, our summer here mimics the northern hemisphere instead of the southern hemisphere, which I found quite interesting after being in Argentina. But anyway, it's a lovely day today here, and we've had a nice summer. We've had it was a day before yesterday. I didn't see the sun all day, which for the last couple of months has been unusual because we generally get sun most of the day in the afternoon. I'm going to tell you, you get on the equator and get sun all day long in the afternoon, man, it gets real hot. Temperature-wise, it doesn't feel like it, but good Lord, is it hot. Big UV stuff here. So anyway, nice day today in Ecuador. Ken, you hadn't stumbled onto us too long, have you?
I've been aware of you for about 2 weeks, but then just jumped on the show the first time that I was talking a couple of days ago.
Yeah, well, we're glad that you had found us and took the initiative to join us. Okay, and
I guess in addition to that, I really want to thank Daniel Mentz for basically introducing this, because I think he does a great job in Southern California, both presenting your information and making it very acceptable and palatable for a lot of people to understand.
That's good. As I said, as I was telling you the other day, it's just it kind of shows you that it's got some kind of divine stuff here in what we're doing. And that is pretty well referenced, I think, by the fact that, as I explained to you the other day, when I went through the course, 300 million plus reduced down to 1,200 and 1,200 down to me. And if I wouldn't have carried this, and I think back on it occasionally and almost shudder, really, that if it wouldn't have been for the efforts and the way this grabbed me and the drive and motivation it's given me to look for answers, all this would have been lost. Because certainly none of the other people out there know it, that are teaching. You were an Anna Von Wright's. I've been wanting to find somebody and say, when when she instructs you to file paperwork and become a national, first of all, she used to suggest you send it to the Secretary of State of your state. I think keying in on the state citizen aspect of this and not knowing that the head Secretary of State is the guy. But what do they tell you when you file this and change status? Do they explain to you what it does for you?
Essentially, they say the same basic things that you say, okay? And so when I look at her process versus what you do here, there's fundamentally one difference, and that's that you get a note that you call for getting a notarized signature, so you get your own signature notarized on the statements that get sent. And so from my standpoint, what that does is that basically assigns that document a creditor status. And so by doing that, you're providing a recognized bridge that they understand for traversing the land into the world of commerce. What she does, so when you look at the paperwork and you distill it down to what it's saying, she uses a lot more words, and she uses these things called deeds of reconveyance and orders of expatriation and all these other various things, but it essentially comes down to the same thing.
Okay, well, there's a big mistake on her part right there. You're not expatriating.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, but when it comes down to the actual operative statements that carry the weight, I would say it's essentially the same thing. Now, the difference is, what is it that creates the authority in her world versus what is it that creates the authority in your world? And the difference there is that she has avoided getting anything, requiring anything to get notarized by the person requesting nationality. The only things that get notarized in the ANA process are what's called two witness testimonies, which is used as identification. And what those are, they're basically two pieces of paper with your picture on it saying, I, Ken, born on da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, I'm the person who I say I am. And those documents get signed and notarized by two people who have known you for 5, 10, 15 years, some period of time. So those become your identification. But in nothing that I send to the Secretary of State of the United States, Secretary of State of whatever state I'm living to, the Secretary of State of my birth state, you know, IRS, blah blah blah, all the governors, all the other folks. But those are the primary people that get notified when I send this stuff out.
Okay. Well, the Secretary of State of your state, and we learned this kind of the hard way, just probing and the process aspect of this. The Secretary of State of your state is now a political subdivision of the federal government, and mostly what they do, from what I can tell, is incorporate businesses and accept fees. Okay. So, we had this happen in Connecticut, you know, as I tell people, the way we get really definitive understanding and information is by pressing the envelope. Okay. And, we had a gal, Kay, one of my original, students from years ago that, had personal stuff for a number of years, and her and her husband came back around, and they had moved from California to Connecticut. And actually, Kay is the one who brought us Joe. Joe was her grandson's guitar teacher. Okay. So you never know where this information goes, right? But anyway, Kay she's a real bulldog, and she, right at the start of COVID is when they started filing all this stuff. And I said, well, you don't have to, but you can file it at the property records office. And so the gals at the property records office where they live were not cooperating. First of all, she had to do it through email and phone, and the girl just said, no, we're not filing this. So I said, well, why don't you send it to the Secretary of State? And the Secretary of State would write back and say, do you have an account with us? Are you trying to open an account with us? Or we don't have you on record as a business, etc. And so finally, after a couple of those, I said, well, realizing what the situation is. And I just said, let's take it over to the Attorney General. He's the head law guy in the state. He can't say no, And the process that we use has been a development, really, and it's come from people trying things like K that didn't work, and we step back and adjust our sights and point it in another direction. I'm pretty sure we got it right now, but you've got to file it with the Secretary or the Attorney General of your state. You don't have to, but if you don't do that, you're not fulfilling the process and weaponizing your position. See, the way I see it, when you file the affidavit with the Secretary of State, what you're basically doing is leveling the playing field. Okay? The playing field has not been level. I should drag out, since you're new, Ken, I should drag out John's old example here. Let's say the feds come to us and they challenge the Patriots to a basketball game, winner take all. Okay. And so the day comes and the Patriots are out there on the court and they're in their little Nikes and they got their Air Jordans on and they're throwing 3-pointers that never touch the metal, and they're doing layups and fancy passing and all that stuff and getting warmed up. And then all of a sudden the feds come out, but the feds don't have little Nikes on. They've got pads and long pants, and they don't have Air Jordans on. They've got these black shoes on with this metal thing on the bottom, and they're carrying around this curved stick and throwing this little thing around at plus 100 miles an hour. So, Ken, who you think's going to win that game?
Well, I would say if it's a basketball game and they're playing by those rules, then the people who are set up to play that game. But it all depends upon what set of rules that game is set up to play.
Well, you see, you hit the nail right on the head. We think we're playing basketball and they're playing hockey. Okay?
Yep.
So that's what's going on, really. Okay. And so if you want to look at it in another way, the playing field has been shifted 45 degrees. We're trying to play uphill. All right. And what you do when you file the affidavit is lower and level the playing field. Now, technically what you're doing is moving back over under God's rights, God's protections, and you owe God the duty. They hate the common law. They've always hated the common law because they can't beat it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so when you do that, you move over here, and it's just a whole different ball game. As I was saying, that's one of the reasons Brent is on the show with me, is because, to my knowledge, he's probably the number one expert in the country on the common law. That's what we're all moving back over under. I think we ought to maybe know something about it, And so that in the big picture, what we're doing is real simple. See, and I think that because people like Anna and David don't understand, again, the big piece that's missing for those folks is they don't know we're dealing with the feudal system. And as my teacher, Glenn Ambort, still alive, says so accurately, if you don't know you're dealing with the feudal system here, you'll never do anything but shadow box with it. Okay. And I hear this terminology, creditor, debtor, and living on the land and all that stuff. And it doesn't register with me, because my way of looking at this is you're either free or you're a slave. Okay. I guess you could frame that in the debtor creditor thing, but isn't it simpler if you're trying to spread this and make it where people can understand it? Isn't it easier to say you're a slave or free rather than are you a creditor or a debtor? They don't understand that, So what I've strived to do here for a lot of years is to simplify this, because to me, the key is to be able to get something where we can get it out into mass numbers that people can understand, so we can get numbers of educated people that can affect change. So to do that, it's got to be simple. The simpler it is, the more effective you're going to be, because of a well-known principle called duplication, which is used all the time in an industry called network marketing. You got to be able to duplicate yourself. And that's kind of the way I've approached this, to get it down to that simple formula. And it is really simple, And now how they've done it is incredibly complex. And they had to do that to hide it. One of the reasons I think they've gone to such lengths here is because this is their system. They built it. They've got to recognize it or, again, be open tyrants. Okay? So one of the reasons they've gone to the lengths here is because the remedy, A, is so damn simple, and B, they've got to recognize it or they're open tyrants. And the effectiveness of it is, well, it's unarguable at this point, 12 and a half years of teaching people this stuff, and never one time have we had any blowback from the feds that I've been informed of. Maybe some I don't know about, but I don't think so. But I've never had one call from anybody who said this affected their life where they could even remotely attach whatever happened to them with filing this paperwork. So it's very powerful. And what we've learned is they're scared as hell of this. I can get on here and call them hikes. I can tell them how much I hate them. I can bait them like they've been baiting Putin. Okay. And they won't put me on those hate lists. They won't even mention my name. Okay. Yeah. They're scared to death of this. All right.
The thing I would say about what I've learned about Anna's process is that she's trying to go back to the fundamental basis of how people would deal with incoming people that wanted to patriate into the United States. And so she goes back to the very early paperwork of that, and she uses that as the vehicle to basically extract out of the U.S. citizen and back into what she calls an American state national, but basically a national, however you want to call it. And so the fact that she has a little bit more. Her paperwork process has a very simple version, like a one-page version, and a more complicated version. So I'm not trying to say that she is only dealing with a creditor-debtor thing, or that she's whatever. I'm not trying to put her in a box for what she's using for the justification of her platform. The justification of the platform and the definition of the platform that she tries to move people into is fundamentally the same thing that you have here, okay? But she uses a different mechanism. You use a notary. She uses her own private recording system to basically put the documents into the public, but it puts it into the public through a private vehicle versus using their vehicle. So that's
okay. Let's address this because it's important. She uses American State National, right? And Straight uses State National, and other people use variations, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Ken, will you please go back through the statutes and regulations and find any place that this is referenced as an American State National?
I don't think there's any place where it is referenced as an American state national.
Well, that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, knowing they've gone to great lengths to do this and hide it. Okay. So now that we know what they've done, and now we know what those words mean, using their exact words with the definitions that they've recognized because they put them in there is the key to the matrix. Using all these other terms and stuff, you can't find it anywhere.
I agree.
Okay.
I do not agree.
So that's the key to this whole thing, is using their words that they've contrived to set this up, because they can't argue with it.
Yeah.
Hey, Roger.
They can argue with, state national, American state national. They can argue with that and ignore you all day long till the cows come home. But they can't ignore this when it's their own stuff, and using their laws, their regulations, their rules, their history, their court cases puts them right square in the corner. They can't do anything but recognize it or be open tyrants. And these guys will never be open tyrants because they know history a whole lot better than we do, and they know where that ends up. Okay. Who said, hey, Roger, there a minute ago?
That was me. It's Joe.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Joe.
Hey. So
I'll say something about the paperwork that they do, right? That Anna von Reitz's group does. When I went to court, they had all this paperwork. It's very uniform. It's the same person to person, right? And so they actually got me confused with somebody else who must have submitted paperwork in, because they handed it to me and he says, "This yours?" And I looked at it and I had no idea what it was. But I did recognize some of the things that was being read. And as soon as I was like, I've never seen this before, they snatched it out of my hand really fast. Right. And, because I think what happened was that they have a way to handle these guys because of the uniform paperwork. But
right.
See, the way we're doing it here with you, everyone does it on an individual basis and they do it their own way. So like my affidavit is different than, maybe, Anthony's or Paul's or, Sketches or, Mira's. Everyone's is different, right? And it's because we all wrote it based off of the same principle, but from our own viewpoint. And I think that's what really got the judge and the court clerk really confused, because they didn't know how to address it, because I'm standing out as an individual man rather than as part of a group that may be just conforming to certain rules under that group. I don't really know what they do, but I noticed that they had a difficult time with me. I think it was because of that, the ununiform paperwork.
Well, one of the excuses they can always drag out is we don't accept form letters, but they send out form letters. Okay.
They get they get the paperwork done for them, the students that learn with DS and
see here, Ken, it's like my reason for not charging people for this is because if somebody pays you, then in their mind they've paid and they sign a piece of paper and they go on about their life, right? Well, in that instance, nothing changes because the world doesn't change. All right. We've got to be the change. We've got to initiate the change. That's why I stress understanding the information and learning it so much. That's where the change is. That's where the change is going to be in you. And that's where the change is. If we can affect change on any kind of scale, that it's going to be from people understanding the information and becoming empowered and becoming a strong, empowered group of independent, free people. Okay. And that's my complaint with people that pay to do this is the minute you pay somebody, well, I'm not going to go study all that. Hell, I'd rather do this or do that or something else. Okay. So to me, it's the education part of this. And I've learned this the hard way. All right. Personally, through my own growth. And then what happened was I got on the air finally and started teaching people. And then I started seeing people pop up like Daryl and Brian Howard, who doesn't come around too much anymore at all. And some of these other folks. And when I saw them become empowered, I could recognize it in me. Okay.
I think that's true with everybody in this entire community. And so, I mean, first off, Anna doesn't charge for her stuff. There's a small recording fee, but she doesn't really charge for the paperwork. She's trying to run a large organization on 50 states, so there are server costs and there are costs going along with it. But when you consider all of it, it's pretty darn nominal. And I think that the retention numbers that she has within her organization, they all basically, I mean, you bring in 100 people, there's probably only going to be 5 or 10 that really step up to be a leadership role and really take the initiative to go do it. I mean, that's just law of averages. And a lot of people hear it for a few times and they walk out. A certain bunch of people stick with it. And where I see that things get a little bit rough is that very few people in the assemblies know how to teach. They do a great job repeating the same story again and again and again, but designing the information as a nice, seamless, easy progression of a curriculum is a big hole. And I would say, from my standpoint, in terms of understanding how organizations work, not just Anna von Reitz or anybody else, When you set your organization up to be a teaching and a learning organization, people stay. When it becomes stagnant and gets lost in a bureaucracy, people leave.
Yeah. Or the confusion. And, my advantage here, as I've said many times, was that John W. Benson was my law teacher. Okay. And John studied law his whole life because he liked it, and he didn't study it in law school where they've been controlling the curriculum for at least 100 years. Okay. And he studied it on his own, and he was particularly enamored with old law, old English law. And in all honesty, he lived his life in the 1500s. He was a Renaissance man. Okay. Everything him and Glenn did was all feudal influences and all that old law and all this stuff. He lived it, man. Okay. Let me give you an example. How much time have you spent with them over there in this? You've been in this, couple of years?
With Anna's, with the assemblies? Yeah. I got started in May of 2020. So 3 years, but I've known about her for probably about 10.
Okay. Well, does she teach in there the legal meaning of the word person?
Oh, God, yeah. 1,000 times a day.
Yeah, what does she teach?
Same thing, corporation, any type of entity, generally a dead corpus. I mean, all the same. I mean, you can read it. I mean, she's got like 3,500 articles, and I'd say 10% of those all repeat the same definition of person. Right,
which is a corporate. This is my litmus test question for patriots. I've been asking it many years, okay, and I've never had a correct answer from anybody in the U.S. And the only answer that I got that was correct was from my attorney in Argentina, which tells me they're teaching real law down there. Okay, so the overriding answer is a corporate fiction.
Yeah.
And that's partially correct, but it's not correct. Okay. And this is the kind of stuff that John taught us. And when you learn this, then everything is clear cut. Okay. Here's the formula that rules the world, Ken and others. Did Demetrius ever show up today? Demetrius with us yet? Or is he playing hooky today? Okay. So the formula that runs the world is real simple. R plus D equals R. R plus D equals R. Pretty simple, right? It's a hell of a lot simpler than E equals MC squared. All right. And what that formula stands for is rights plus duties equal remedies. And that formula governs every body of law in the world. And the way that it does that is this word person. A person is an entity, keyword entity, to whom the law ascribes rights and duties. An entity to whom the law ascribes rights and duties. Entity can be a lot of things. It can be a corporation, which it is. It can be a partnership, which it is. It can be a trust, which it is. Or it can be a human person, which is always, without exception, in the law, labeled an individual. And the question is, from where do you get your rights and to whom you owe your duties? And so all persons born, 14th Amendment. What type of person is that? That's a federal citizen who receives civil rights from the federal government and owes the federal government the duties. So it's not, are you a person? It's which person are you? Oh, well, no, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I've put my affidavit into the Secretary of State. I'm no longer a citizen of the United States, so I get no civil rights from the United States federal government. Therefore, I owe no correlative duties like income tax. Let me tell you this story. Years ago, when I was in Atlanta early in this, we had a guy there named Charlie Gray who had a pretty thriving antiques business. You know, there are a lot of antiques in Atlanta in the South. He had a big antiques business, and he ran afoul of the IRS. He was a John Nelson student. You haven't heard that name, have you? John Nelson?
Not John Nelson, no.
An exceptionally proficient legal researcher. He's got a low profile now. He lives out in Colorado, and they murdered his sister and put a hit out on him, evidently, and he went underground. But he had a lot of impact 20, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Okay. So Charlie was a John Nelson student. John Nelson was a great researcher, and he couldn't teach somebody how to wipe their butt. He was a terrible teacher. Okay. But boy, he had great information. So Charlie was one of his students, and he got cross with the IRS, and he decided to do everything pro se, and he did a damn good job. Okay, he really did. It's difficult to go into court for us folks that aren't schooled and trained in procedure. Okay, and so it's threatening too if you've never been there. So Charlie goes to district court against the IRS failure to file. And he did a very, very good job of subpoenaing witnesses. And he subpoenaed a couple of district court judges, actually. Got them on the stand, okay? And one of the district court judges, they were Jewish, and in open court, I mean, people, jury, the whole 9 yards, federal court in Atlanta. And he starts asking the judge, he said, did you take a Kol Nidre oath last year? Do you know about the Kol Nidre?
No.
You ever heard of a Jewish holiday called the Day of Atonement?
Sure.
Well, there's two, Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement. Okay, Rosh Hashanah, I think they call it. That is on an annual basis where they go into the synagogue and they take an oath that they can lie, cheat, and steal for the next year without impunity, basically. Now, before the 1600s, they would go into the synagogue and take an oath to forgive them of all the lying and cheating and stealing they'd done the previous year. But around that time, around Sabbatai V, they switched it to the upcoming year. So basically, they're like James Bond. They got a license to steal. Okay? That's the Kol Nidre oath. You can go look it up. So anyway, but one of the people that he subpoenaed and got on the stand was the district director of the IRS. And so I was in the courtroom that day. Okay. And here's little old diminutive Charlie. He's about 5'4", you know, nothing exemplary about Charlie. He's over there at the defense table. He's got the IRS district director on the stand. And he's asking him some questions. And the district director had some of those little half glasses on, you know, those reading glasses where somebody can tilt their head down and look over their glasses at you real stern, like, you know what I'm talking about? And so he asked that guy a question, and he pulls out the three sections that the IRS always dings you on is 6001, 6011, and 6012. Regulations. And so he pulls out the regulation and he starts reading it to Charlie in open court. And it said, any person who and he reads it and he looks over his glasses and he turns his head down. He goes, you look like a person to me.
Which one?
And you could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. And I maintain that was when the jury convicted Charlie Gray. And they did. He had to spend 1.5 years in Club Fed down there in Atlanta where Al Capone stayed. So this term person's real important. And I'm going to tell you, nobody in our movement understands it. And one of the reasons is because we can prove that they've been controlling the curriculum in law schools for 100 years. And therefore, if they control the law schools, they control the curriculum, don't they?
Yeah. And the dictionary.
So what I like, all that. Yeah, you can see it with Westlaw and the changes in blacks and all that kind of stuff. So I liken these guys to those scouts out in the Old West that were the real good scouts. And they'd sneak up the hill, look over the hill and see Custer and his forces down there. And then they'd turn around with a switch and back out and brush out their footprints. That's what these guys do. Okay. So another example of that is John called up the dean of one of the law schools there in Utah. He was a devout Mormon. Called up the dean of one of the law schools one day and got him on the phone and said, well, I'm thinking about coming back to law school. And Dean goes, well, man, we welcome you with open arms. Love to have you. And they get in a conversation. And John goes, I'm particularly interested in the word person. And the dean goes, oh, yeah, we teach that. We teach it in a course called jurisprudence. It's an elective, and when enough people sign up for it, we teach it. And John astutely asked, when was the last time you taught it? 6 years ago. So 6 graduating classes graduated from his law school, and they were never exposed to the meaning of the word person. That's why when you go out and present this stuff to lawyers, they don't know it. They were never taught it. They weren't exposed to it. That's why this old information is so critical. They've gone to great lengths to keep this out of our hands. Okay? And when you learn that and learn the formula and see how it interacts and you receive your rights to whom you owe your duties, and then there's that other little word that's real important. It must be important. One word is equal to both of the other words on the other side of the equation, remedy. You hear a lot of people in our movement talk about rights. Most of them call them constitutional rights, which is inaccurate because, it's not inaccurate. It's just off point because the only rights the document gives you is civil rights under the 14th Amendment. All the rest of the document is protection for people with God-given rights. Okay? So you get into this in depth and you learn some of these accurate legal theories that have been around since Gaius, by the way. The guy that's accredited with inventing the law was a Roman named Gaius, Gaius. He wrote a group of books called Gaius's Institutes. They're foundational. The whole first part of Gaius's Institutes is on the word person. Think it might be important?
I look at what Anna does and what basically all teachers do is everybody's kind of got an anchor point, and that anchor point is the thing that people said, oh my God, this is the Holy Grail. This is the thing that I really got to elucidate here. And in many regards, they're all right. Every single one of them is right, even if you have a different anchor point.
Right.
And so, what I'm not here to cast anybody to be 100% correct and anybody else to be 100% wrong. I'm going to say there's kind of greater levels of functionality in what you're doing. The process you have is very straightforward. It's very simple. It's very unrebuttable, because you're using all of the common technologies, words, and techniques that they're using. All right, I get that.
That's right.
And so from the individual or from the man or the woman coming in and saying, I want to be protected, I want to be truthful within my own status, this is an amazing process to go. Let's be clear that Anna's focus, her final goal, is to reseat the counties, reseat the state, reseat all of this structure that she calls the Federation of States, the Confederation of States, the Union of States, all these different things. She's got a whole understanding of how do we bring back the land jurisdiction on a massive scale. That's her goal. And this other thing of getting people papered up is just step one of like a 15-step process. And so right. what I'm looking at is saying the people that she's looking to bring into the organization are all of the people that want to start filling and seating their county with their offices and their states with their offices. And so I look at it, and my purpose when I came in, the first thing that I saw within her organization was, where is she talking to all of the other truth leaders out in the world? is she talking to all these other people that could at least understand what she's talking about and get the word out? And I would say that to everybody. So if we have 15 or 20 truth leaders out there, how come we don't have a truth leader conference that gets everybody together and says, look, can we all agree on, let's say, 5 things that this world really needs? And let's take our own particular acts out of the game and say, let's just focus on these 5 things. Because guess what? That's leveraged to win in the big scale. Everybody can have their own technology with it.
Have you ever tried to get any of these people in the same room? It turns into a hair pulling contest.
Oh, I know. It's a ridiculous issue. My role in the assembly was ombudsman. I'm there to resolve conflicts. I'm trying to be able to listen to people having differing sides, and I have to say, okay, what's the common theme that nobody can disagree with, and we'll start there and work down. And I get frustrated with it. I just say, man, this is ridiculous.
Well, that's my point. I'm not dissing Anna or Trade, okay? I'd like to think I'm a guy, a half glass, half full guy, okay? And I'd like to think that they're doing the best they can with what they've got to work with. And I'd like to think that there's no charlatans out there that are proffering this type of information that are just trying to be what we call patriots, okay? And there's been a bunch of them in this movement, all right? So all I know to do is to go in there and teach what I know is true, this information that I was privy to because of my teacher that virtually nobody else knows. Our enemies know it real well. Our people don't, okay? And I don't see this as a group effort. She's using groups to try and accomplish a goal. I know how groups are. And you're always going to have dissension and disagreements in there unless everybody's on the exact same page. Okay. And that's why we go back and teach these basics to individuals, hopefully to get enough strong individuals to where we can pull that off, but without the dissension. Okay, so I have a different approach, different idea, different information, and all that kind of stuff. And the one thing that I do know is I know this is gospel. I know it. Okay,
Roger.
I've seen react to it. Okay, I've seen them put my teachers in federal prison for 15 and a half years on a bunch of trumped up bullshit just to get this information off the street. Samuel, what you got?
And honestly,
I think one of the main things that's in the way of all of this is Roosevelt's emergency powers, which have never gone away,
Yep.
and those were really conjured up by the bank. The bank was stealing all the gold and couldn't support the currency with it, and wanted to blame it on the American people, so they stole all their gold instead. So that's the problem. That's the bottom line.
They didn't do this for the gold. The gold was just involved in the big plan. Okay. So
they were
don't focus on
they
that,
were embezzling the gold out of the system, is what I'm saying. They were embezzling. They couldn't support the system that they had built because they had embezzled it away. So then they blamed the people for it and stole their gold and created an emergency.
And they totally planned that. They knew what they were going to do, or else they wouldn't have set the 14th Amendment up. And that's what I really wanted to cover today, but I'm off on this conversation with Ken.
All our courts are still in martial rule. That's why when you go to a traffic court, stare decisis or nothing like that means anything. Special appearance doesn't mean anything. You're in a martial rule court. That thing is under martial law, basically.
You're under emergency rule, and that's why you'll get into a courtroom occasionally and bring up the Constitution, and the judge will say, don't bring that document up in this courtroom. Right. And the patriot stands there just bedazzled. What do you mean? Okay, well, you're under the Constitution, all right, but you're not under the whole Constitution. You're under the 13th and the 14th Amendment.
Rules of necessity.
So So anyway, Ken, but I sense you've been sent to us. You're a sharp guy, obviously, and you've got a lot of skills and stuff from the little bit we know about you. And with people like that, I'll take the extra time with you, okay? Because I see potential there, and I don't know what you're going to do with this information. Hell, John and Glenn didn't know what I was going to do with it. All I know is to put the information, infuse it into people, and let the information motivate and guide them. Okay.
Roger, just wanted to let you know that Bama's on the call too.
Okay, good.
So
I'm not trying to exclude Bama. Okay. So what I really wanted to do is go back over the history of this and show you how pre-planned it is, Ken. Okay.
Absolutely.
But first, let's go back to what hooked me originally with this and those seminars is Revelation 18. All right. Revelation 18 is an incredibly important verse. It's a series of verses, obviously. And it starts out, of course, written by the chairman of the jury, as Brent calls him, John, the only one that wasn't murdered, that died in chains in Patmos in a slave mine. Okay. And he wrote Revelation. And Revelation's very revealing, obviously, but this particular set of verses in 18, to me, is even more so than it may be to you by the time we get finished. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but it starts out, Babylon, O Babylon the Great, has fallen in an hour, and the merchants of the world wail, for they can no longer sell their merchandise. You familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. Right underneath that, it says, come out of her, my people, come out of her. It repeats it twice, not very many times. I'm not the great Bible scholar, okay? But there's not too many times that I can remember here in the Bible where it repeats something twice, and I got to figure that's for emphasis, okay? So come out of her, my people, come out of her. Now, underneath that verse, there's a couple of verses I call the remedy verses. Back to this little remedy thing on the other side of the equation. And it says, fill her cup double what she served you. Serve her double what she served you. It's kind of repetitive right there. Well, I had somebody say, well, that's God telling you what to do. It doesn't say, I'm going to fill her cup double. It says, fill her cup double. And right above that, this says, come out of her. Well, I think that we are the remnant and that we're supposed to come out of her. Okay. And I believe those remedy verses are to be executed by the remnant. But certainly God's not going to do it. He doesn't say he's going to do it in there. He says you do it. Okay. Now if you go down a little bit, there's a list of about 21 items, 22 maybe, of the items that the merchants are wailing about because they can no longer sell them. All right. And it says your gold, your silver, your frankincense, your myrrh, your ivory, your this, your that. Long list of items. And at the very last one, it says, and bodies and souls of men.
Mm-hmm.
So I dare say in advance the fact that they can't buy and sell you if they don't own you. So this is predicted in Revelation. It does not say, except for the United States of America. It doesn't say that. It just says bodies and souls of men. So what we're dealing with here, at least in my mind, is the beast system of Revelation. Now, to buttress that, there's an article. It's on the website there. It happened right at the first of COVID. I don't know if you heard about it or not. It's over in England. And a mother had the baby, and they're checking the new babies for COVID, ridiculous as it sounds. And they're using the PCR test where they jam that long Q-tip up the nose, and the baby starts squalling. And the mother's right there. Doesn't have a birth certificate yet. It just got born. Okay? And the mother objects because the baby is discomforted by this thing, and the nurse turns to the mother and says, you can't object, this baby's our property. So there's the same thing, right? Birth, property. But this is the beast system of Revelation. This is where it all is, okay? Assigning a political status determined on where you're born, not who your parents were, and bringing in underneath it, because of that element, the feudal system where you're their property. This is a worldwide system. You know, a couple of years ago when Obama was in and he went over to Paris to sign the Paris Peace Accords, the one that Trump yanked us out of immediately. And at the last minute on that conference, they added 2 different things to the accord they were signing. One of them, everybody born in the world has a birth certificate, and everybody born in the world has an ID tied to that birth certificate. This is the beast system revelation we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
They've been planning this a long time. Okay. You go back to Civil War days. What led up to it, and, you know, we talked about it a bit yesterday. It's what kind of led into this conversation today. There was all kinds of dissensions in the country, and it was exacerbated by, let's call it the Jeffersonian South versus the Lincolntonian North. Good way to frame it. Okay. So Jefferson was more on Constitution and all those things. And it was, if you go back and look at the economics of the day, it's fascinating. Every southern state had more capita per income than any northern state. The richest states in the country were the southern states. Interestingly enough, number 1 switched back and forth between South Carolina and Mississippi. Mississippi, who's perennially at the bottom of every list you look at now. Okay. Yeah. Mississippi was the highest per capita income in the country. All right.
The Delta.
So they used, they did. They had the Mississippi River and the cotton growing. But,
the rich land.
Yeah, the rich land and a way to get it, and a crop that everybody wanted, and a cash crop and all that stuff. And of course, there's where the necessity for slave labor came from, really. So anyway, it was the tariff difference, as we mentioned yesterday, that they used, even though they covered it with the slave thing. It was underneath the tariffs and the friction exacerbated by the use of them that pitted these two against each other. Just like where in 2014 we went in and did an overthrow in the Ukraine, the Maidan, and then for the last however many years, the Ukrainians have been shelling the Donbass and the other areas in Crimea there. You know, they killed 15,000 Crimeans over a period of 8 years or so before then Russia did a referendum. They voted 98% to be Russian, just like Austria voted to be German under Hitler. And so then the Ukrainians start shelling them, long-distance artillery, and they've killed an estimated 15,000 people, just artillery shells dropping in your town. And finally, Putin moves in. Well, then they go, oh, the evil Putin invaded Ukraine. Well, this is just exactly like setting up the Civil War with the tariffs. But I maintain, now that we know the end game, that we can look back and see that this was premeditated all the way back to those days. And as I started thinking about it, and I've only recently come to this conclusion, fairly recently, last few years, just because I'm totally immersed in this. When I'm not with you guys and I'm out eating lunch or doing something, I sit there many times alone, and this is what I think about. And I go into all these situations like, what didn't I see before? What could I see better? How could this affect something else that I hadn't noticed? And I'm constantly probing this in my mind. Okay. I mean, I live with this. Okay. And so it hit me, and I started looking at it, because we talk about the 14th Amendment all the time, but we don't talk about the 13th Amendment too much, you know? And the 13th Amendment was the existing one. No, not the original, the one that they've got in there now. Okay. So they got rid of the original one and brought in this one and called it the same number. Okay, we don't get off into that too much, all right? So anyway, and the new one, and if you may not know the history, I didn't. After the Civil War, they let the Southern legislators back into Congress to vote on the 13th Amendment. Now, isn't that interesting? So here they fought a war over all these differences, but they let the legislators in from the South to vote on the 13th Amendment. Now, that was in June of 1868. By December, when they voted on the 14th Amendment, they went back and kicked all the Southern states out of the Union. Here's these guys had fought a whole war, 600,000 people died or whatever, to try and remove themselves from the Union. And they lose, and then the Union kicks them out until they ratified the 14th Amendment. And if they didn't ratify the 14th Amendment, they sent scallywags and all the army and stuff down there, and they'd go into the state. And they'd replace the legislature with all these new freed blacks and what there was a name for those people that come down. I can't remember it right now. Anyway, they'd fill up the legislature with those people and they'd burn the law libraries.
So they brought in a whole different legislature, but from the pre-existing states. It was different people. Well,
if the state, back to a state, not the state, if a state would not ratify the 14th Amendment, they'd replace the legislature and they would burn the law libraries. Okay.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let them back in until they ratify the 14th Amendment. Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Kind of unusual. By the way, do you know that the U.S. is the only country in history that ever fought a war to end slavery?
No.
I didn't know that. Now, isn't that unusual? And the reason
was the federal government distributing money to the states at that time? So
I don't know. I don't know a lot of I doubt it. Well, probably maybe to the northern states, and I don't know. It's not really super relevant to the point I'm trying to make here. But the fact is, the reason that stands out in history is because they didn't fight a war to end slavery. They fought a war to get a system in place where they could enslave everybody. Yeah. The dialectic principle here is really important to understand and to incorporate in all your thinking, because you can always find the answer in the dialectic, because their whole deal is based on dialectics. It's the foundation of everything they do. Okay. So the 13th Amendment says I'm going to paraphrase it here, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the states unless a person has been duly convicted of a crime. And then it says a couple other things, and it says in their jurisdictions, there. So there's plural. Federal government was singular. So obviously it's referring to the states. This is the setup. These guys never do it. These things they're accomplishing are so big, they can't do it in one step. They've got to use gradualism, and they've got to use, in this case, about 4 steps, maybe 5. Usually they cock the hammer and pull the trigger, basically. Okay. So this is the cocking of the trigger. And what keys you into it, if you understand what's going on, is the word there. Because when you look in the 14th Amendment, and it says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that's singular. So there's the plural, and there's the singular. What's going on here? We got to think like our enemies. Well, we got to think like our enemies a little bit. What were they really trying to accomplish? Their end game was to get everybody in the country into the federal status, because now they're slaves and they can pull all their funny stuff off. They got the credit spout, so they can leaven the leaven of the Pharisees, so they can leaven up a whole international monetary system off of that credit spout. And when they got you in their jurisdiction, they can also build an administrative state of unelected bureaucrats to make man-made laws to govern you. Those are the two big objects that I see that they were trying to accomplish. That's the reason they used a feudal system, because they get a property right in you and they can do these things. Okay.
The one thing I think you're missing is that you have to realize is that when Lincoln did the executive order to reconvene Congress, he couldn't, obviously, as you know, he couldn't do that as a desert officer of the United States, and so at the same time there was a name change so that the United States became basically a municipal corporation, and at that point they had
he also declared martial law.
No, hold on, Samuel. Please.
They had the 100% ability to do everything because number one, nobody objected, and the second thing is the implied consent was never abutted.
Well, they do everything on presumption, and that's why what we do works, is because we rebut the presumption before they get started. Okay, let's address this corporate issue. The federal government wasn't incorporated until 1871. We're talking about 1868 here. Okay, and according to Larry B. Kraft's research, and Larry B. Kraft may have his faults, but he's a hell of a good legal researcher, okay? And according to Larry B. Kraft's research, they unincorporated it in 1874, all right? But even before the incorporation, the 14th Amendment says subject to the jurisdiction thereof, singular. So there was a singular power there before an incorporation. Okay, so let's look at the ways that what they were trying to accomplish. Their goal was to turn all these people with God-given rights that were state citizens into federal citizens eventually. That's why the 13th Amendment is so critical in that word there. That's the big net that they were going to eventually cast over the states and trick your ass into being a federal citizen. Now look at the 14th Amendment. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, comma, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, comma, are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Notice the 14th Amendment does not say all persons born or naturalized in the United States, comma, are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, does it? It says and. If there are people that are and subject, there are people that are and not subject. The dialectic again, aren't there? Okay. There are, I forget what it's 8 or 9. There's at least 8 legal landmines in that sentence. At least 8. Person, born, naturalized, United States, and subject, jurisdiction, citizen of the United States, state wherein they reside. Every one of those is a legal landmine. Now, notice when you analyze it, I don't know how familiar you are with law. Okay, you can, or other people listening, Bama or whoever. But if you go in and you study law, many times you'll see when they're trying to reach a conclusion, they'll go, well, there's a 2-part or 3-part or 4-part test. If you meet this and this and this and that, then this applies. They call them tests in law, okay? So the 14th Amendment, when you really look at it and analyze it, is a 2-part legal test. First part is you got to be born or naturalized in the United States. And the second part is you got to be and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're both of those things, then it tells you you're a citizen of the United States and the state wherein you reside, right? Mm-hmm. Well, there's the 2 questions. Are you a citizen of the United States? Or are you a resident? They're right there in the 14th Amendment. And if you're those, then you're subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and you meet both tests of the 14th Amendment. And hey, guess what? You're a federal slave. Right?
Exactly. How do you rebut out? Which is exactly what you're doing.
Okay. So how did they know they were going to start asking you those questions in the next century?
They deal with a 100-year plan.
They knew this going in. It was totally set up. But you can't identify that unless you know the end game. Now that we know the end game and how it's set up and operates, well, there's the two questions. They had the two questions in the legislation in 1868.
Yeah. I think I would surmise is that they basically devised this whole plan after Jackson. They looked at it.
Probably.
And they said, we cannot do it with a head-on approach. We have to be able to find another way that cannot be defeated because people will not see it coming.
I look at it exactly like that in that same time frame, and them going back to the drawing board, because the Supreme Court ruled against Jackson there. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Jackson vetoed the second bank. The bankers got it to the Supreme Court, and they ruled against President Jackson on that. And he said, let them enforce it. And so we go then. Guess what else happened right around that time frame, Ken? I know you don't know. I'm just playing. I like to ask questions, okay? The other really key thing that happened in 1837, the Rothschilds established Reform Judaism.
How did that affect the U.S., though? I mean, I can see that definitely impacting Europe.
But it gave them the setup to get together for all these Talmudists and set up the immigration that went on later and all of that kind of stuff. But that's real key. Don't forget, in the previous century, on May 1st of 1776, they established the Illuminati. Okay?
Yeah.
And whether they had this plan scoped out at that point, I don't know. Okay, we'll never know, obviously. But as you can see the progress of events, and they get rid of the first bank, and then they get rid of the second bank, and these guys go back and say, we're going to set up a system that's going to enslave these sorry bastards, and they ain't even going to have a chance of understanding what's going on. There was some letters. There was a Rothschild single. He died young in his 20s. He was from France, I believe. He was one of the Rothschilds, and he was over here on a tour of North America, and some of his letters are in the National Archives. And in one of his letters, he makes this statement: Judah P. Benjamin has to be the most brilliant mind on the continent. Isn't that an interesting statement?
Wow.
You know who Judah P. Benjamin was?
You've mentioned him a couple times, and I wasn't really aware of him before I heard the name.
He was
bringing it up.
Well, he was a Jew. He lived in Louisiana. He was a plantation owner, and he married a slave gal. The generals of the South called him Jefferson Davis's pet Jew. There's some insinuation there may have been some homosexuality involved there. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I've just heard it, okay? But he had Jefferson Davis's ear, and the Southern generals hated him. He was the one in the very first battle of the Civil War, Manassas, when the North didn't have a force yet, and the South did, and they could have literally walked in and taken over Washington, D.C. at Manassas. And Judah P. Benjamin called them back. Now, later on in the Civil War, Judah P. Benjamin and Jefferson Davis were going from wherever they were in the South up to Richmond, and they had all the South's gold. And they got around Savannah, and Judah P. Benjamin said, you go on, I'll meet you in Richmond. And he got the South's gold. There was a ship waiting for him in Savannah that took him to the Caribbean on a super fast British whatever. And they took the gold, and they took Judah P. Benjamin, and they sailed him back to England, and he ended up knighted and the head barrister for the crown.
A man of multiple allegiances.
There's still a statue of Abraham Lincoln today in Westminster. It did not get torn down.
Don't forget Benjamin. Judah Benjamin burned all the papers, everything about the Civil War.
Well, I didn't know that, Murr, but it wouldn't surprise me a bit. By the way, Ken, an audience in New Orleans, where they, in the middle of the night with Mayor Landrieu, brought a crane there and took the statue of Robert E. Lee out of Jackson Square, right there by the river. They left the statue of Judah P. Benjamin standing a couple of blocks away.
They took the image out of the search engine, so if you want to try to find it.
Wow.
So this is some of that deep hidden history, okay? But because we now know what the end game was to eventually enslave everyone in the U.S. and then make the dollar the world reserve currency that's based on your future labor so they could control the world and its commerce through the dollar. That's the outvent. That's the end game of the 14th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment, because of that little word there. T-H-E-I-R.
Man, you've covered a lot of detail here. This is incredible.
It's unbelievable. Now, a couple of times through history, between when they implemented it, Paul, would you go look up Downs v. Bidwell and get that cite for us and read it to us when we get to it, if you could, please? So, immediately after the passage in the next few years, there was a couple of real important court cases. I try not to bring court cases and statutes and regulations in here because they confuse people, and that's part of the reason I try and simplify this as much as possible. Okay, but there's times when those things come in very valuable, and that's now. Okay, so in 1868, they ratified it. It was originally, by the way, the working title of the 14th Amendment was called the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and it was introduced by a railroad lawyer from Ohio, okay, senator. So we go along, and in 1878, I believe, was one of the first challenges, at least at the Supreme Court, and it had nothing to do with blacks. It was with Indians. And the case is Elk, E-L-K, Elk v. Wilkins. Okay? And so the story on it is Elk was an Indian. He came off the reservation because he wanted to vote. He went to the registrar's office. Wilkins was the registrar. Wilkins said, "You're an Indian. I'm not registering you to vote. You can't be a citizen of the United States." So Elk leaves. Election day comes. He comes off the reservation and goes to the polls. Wilkins, being the registrar, is sitting on the polls, and he won't let him vote. So he sued him. Went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, "You're not black. You can't be a citizen of the United States. You're an Indian." So right there, they were recognizing sovereignty, weren't they? Within the country. Okay. And in that case is the only case where that middle phrase of the 14th Amendment was covered, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And it says that phrase means completely subject to the political jurisdiction. Now, that phrase in that case is cited again in another one we're going to talk about in just a second. Okay. So that was 1878. We go through the 80s. We get into the 1890s. During this whole period of time, we got Jim Crow, right? Black, white, black, white, black, white. So there's a lot of people that want to challenge that. There was a progressive. It's funny how so much of this stuff comes out of Louisiana, really. So there was a progressive newspaper in New Orleans. I don't remember the name of it. One of our real good students who doesn't join us, but probably listens still, Lauren. Boy, a real female lioness right here. Lauren saw a couple of years ago a commemoration of this case. And it was some kind of I don't remember the commemoration date, but anyway, she sent me an article on this case and this situation, so we know more background on it. Okay, so there was a progressive newspaper in New Orleans, and they wanted to challenge the Jim Crow laws, and so they put out a call for donations, and they raised about $3,000, which I'm sure in the 1890s was a good bit of change. And they went out and found a subject, and his name was Plessy, Plessy. This is the most important case, Ken and Bama, that you'll never hear another Patriot researcher talk about. And, man, it's pivotal. Okay? Plessy v. Ferguson. Now, I'd encourage you to go read about it. I'm going to tell you about it. Okay? Plessy v. Ferguson was in 1896, I believe. They went out and found this guy, Plessy. And I say found him, they had to hunt for him. Because Plessy was 9/10 white and 1/10 black. So they dressed Plessy up in his Sunday best, took him to the train station on an intra-state railroad, only within Louisiana. So state law applied. And they got Plessy dressed up in his Sunday best. They took him to the train station. They had the newspapers there, including theirs, and they had the guards that they'd hired to arrest him. And they ran Plessy into the white-only railroad car. Then they arrested him, took him off, went to court. The first judge ruled against him. His name was Ferguson. So they enjoined him in the case. Went to the Supreme Court. Okay. And the Supreme Court came back and said, nope, separate but equal. So, Ken, how can white drinking fountains and black drinking fountains, white restrooms, black restrooms, etc., how can those be equal?
They clearly are not.
Well, they are on one level. They both had a political status. One's inferior to the other, but they both had a political status, didn't they? Now, this is a major obstacle these guys had to overcome. Separate but equal. Whitey is a state citizen. Jim Crow was a federal citizen. Jim Crow had civil rights. Whitey had God-given rights. It's not a racial question. This is a political status question.
So just out of curiosity, were any of these terms redefined within the dictionaries at the time to include a wider definition?
I don't know, and I don't think so. Most people didn't have any idea, especially hidden underneath of this feudal system. See? Okay, they just knew they're black, so obviously they're citizens of the United States. So that was in 1896. Now, 2 years later, one of the most important cases to ever hit the Supreme Court hit. If you remember back when Obama was in and all the birthers that were trying to say he doesn't have a birth certificate, this is the case they used, okay, because it is the biggest case in the history of our country at the Supreme Court on where all these issues are addressed, okay, and that case is called U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark. You may have heard of that case before. It's got some legs, you know. So in the dissent of Wong Kim Ark, Chief Justice Fuller, who was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he was from Maine. He was a real estate lawyer in Chicago and somehow got to the Supreme Court and got to be Chief Justice. So he understood real estate law and land law. Okay. By the way, here's an interesting little tidbit for you. Do you know that the term estate means less than true ownership? So, Bama, when you're talking about real estate, right there in the title and the label, you've got less than true ownership, because estate is what a king gives to the nobles in the feudal system.
Very different than property.
Very. And property, we misuse that. If you want to use it legally, we misuse that phrase. See, I say, Ken, you just paid for that car out there, man. I guess that's your property now. And you'd say yes. And we'd all understand what we were talking about. This is another angle they work on, is these two twin levels. They use a colloquial definition. They use a highly technical definition. We, not knowing the technical definition, rely on the colloquial definition to try and go into court. And we get our asses beat every time because we don't know the definition they're working on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Property is a right. Colloquially, we call it property. Legally, it's called a thing. And property is your right in and to the thing. Slight shift, but pretty damned important. Okay.
Yeah.
So Wong Kim Ark, a little background on it. He was a Chinaman. Wong Kim Ark was born in the United States. His parents immigrated to California. He was born. As he got older, he wanted to go back to China and see his grandparents. Went back to China, came back, no problem, got in. A few years later, wanted to go to China again, went back to China, went to come back. And at that point, it was out west, the discrimination against the Chinese was somewhat akin to the discrimination of the blacks in the South. Okay. So there's a big movement against the Chinese. All right. And the second time he comes back, the immigration guy won't let him in, even though he was born in the U.S. So at that point, the Chinese were getting so discriminated on that the only outlet they had was the court system. So all of a sudden, tens of thousands of court cases are starting to be filed and jamming up the whole court system. So they let one case get up to the Supreme Court, U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. Okay. In the dissent in Wong Kim Ark, I should have sent it to Paul and he could read it. Here, I'm going to paraphrase it for you. Okay. You had Chief Justice Fuller, who'd been Chief Justice for over 10 years, and you had one of the greatest justices our country's ever produced named John Harlan. Are you familiar with John Harlan at all? Has that name come up, Ken, to you?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, he's one that I've studied a moderate amount, probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
He's an interesting guy. Well, he was so great, he had his own nickname. They called him the Great Dissenter. And in just a minute, I'm going to give you a sample of that, and Paul reads this cite to us a couple of years later. Right now, we're talking about Wong Kim Ark in 1898, and in the dissent on Wong Kim Ark, Harlan and Fuller nailed this. They nailed it. They saw it. Okay. And the short thing I'm going to paraphrase for you is, according to the act, if the act is according to the rule, they're talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the working title of the 14th Amendment. They're saying it brought the feudal system into the country for the first time. It was the relationship between a liege man and a liege lord. You seen those old movies where the guy takes his fist and bumps his armor and goes, "Yes, my liege. Yes, my liege," right?
Yep.
That's the relationship between a liege man and a liege lord. This is the basis of jurisdiction. It comes from the feudal system. And it's allegiance for protection, protection for allegiance. That's why in the current statutes it says a national owes total allegiance to a small s state. Well, if you owe total allegiance, then the state reciprocally has to give you protection. Protection for allegiance, allegiance for protection, jurisdiction. That's where it comes from. Okay. So in that little part in the dissent, and they say this is the relationship of a liege man to a liege lord. And it is absolute and unbending and unchanged by time or space. And it comes onto our country just as England is being relieved of its inconveniences. These guys didn't know the end game like we do, but they saw what was happening and put it in that decision. It's there. Okay. So 2 years later, we get a group of cases that come to the Supreme Court where, like the slaughterhouse cases, which we hadn't brought up out of Louisiana, a bunch of cases, and they just pile them all together and call them plural. Well, this group is called the insular cases. And most of the cases dealt with all this territory that we were acquiring on the other side of the world through the Spanish-American War and the Philippines and all these islands. And in one of that grouping was a little island called American Samoa, which becomes incredibly important. Okay. So one of the cases in the insular cases is Downs v. Bidwell. And Harlan wrote the dissent. Paul, have you got that keyed up?
Yeah, I have Downs v. Bidwell. And
okay, if you look down Wikipedia, a little ways down the page, unbelievably, this site from that case is in Wikipedia.
Actually, I'm not looking in Wikipedia. I'm just, yeah. And
if you just go over to Wikipedia, they pulled the site out of there, okay? It's just a little ways down on the page, but you read it the other day. But this is Harlan, and I'd rather have Paul read it because it's so damn much more eloquent than I can paraphrase it. Okay. So
Roger, just wanted to let you know, Dimitri's jumped on too, and Heather's here.
Good. Okay,
and Heather
good.
from Michigan.
Okay, great. Glad to have you guys along board. So if we can get this, it's just so eloquent. Harlan was an outstanding jurist, probably one of the finest jurists our country's ever produced. And you know what's interesting? Ken, you said you knew a little bit about him. He was from a blue blood family in Kentucky, and his son followed him on the bench. John Harlan Jr. served as a Supreme Court justice also. Very interesting. And he was called the Great Dissenter. He had his own name because he was always dissenting. Okay. And this one that a listener brought us one day, I wasn't familiar with it, is just such an outstanding bit of oratory. And it's so illustrative of this time frame story that we're going over here. Okay. Paul, did you get it yet?
Yeah. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution prohibiting slavery and involuntary servitude within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction is also significant as showing that there may be places within the jurisdiction of the United States that are no part of the Union. To say that the phraseology of this amendment was due to the fact that it was intended to prohibit slavery in the seceded states under a possible interpretation that those states were no longer a part of the Union is to confess the very point, but I'm getting to it, is to confess the very point in issue, since it involves an admission that if these states were not part of the Union, they were still subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Upon the other hand, the 14th Amendment, upon the subject of citizenship, declares only that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Here there is a limitation to persons born or naturalized in the United States, which is not extended to persons born in any place subject to their jurisdiction.
And don't forget, they naturalized people in the states before the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment brought it into federal naturalization. That's not the part. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two forms of government at the bar. That's the site I'm looking for. Okay. I'm going to paraphrase it. Okay, so it says, ladies and gentlemen of the bar, we've got two different forms of government at the bar here. One is under our Constitution, and the other mimics the monarchies of Europe. And he's so much more eloquent than I can get this across. Okay. And heaven forbid the day that we fall under that form of government, basically. So what Harlan saw was the two separate forms of government being brought up, and it revolved around these islands that these disputes came out of on the other side of the world. This is where they were setting up American Samoa. Again, this is how far in advance these guys work, because that was 1901, and they didn't pull the string on the national thing until 1940. Okay. So, Downs v. Bidwell is just another example of the places someone has seen what was going on, but they didn't really know, but they could see them forming this. Okay. So that was 1901. If we get up into William McFadden's talks on the House from that little book that came up yesterday, The Collective Speeches of William T. McFadden, if you want to know what was going on historically, financially, and all the rest at this point in time, I don't believe there's a better resource I could point you to than The Collective Speeches of Lewis T. McFadden. It was 31 speeches between 1931 and 1933 until they killed him. Okay. And he saw what was going on. He called them out, put articles of impeachment in against them that have still never come out of committee. But one of the things he said, it's included in my book, they're erecting a Machiavellian feudal system. Now, McFadden saw it. Fuller and Harlan saw elements of it. Okay, so there were people between the Civil War and when this happened that did, with their incredible insight, see what they were planning and called it. Okay. So, of course, in 33, they pulled the string. At that point, they switched everybody into the federal status as sureties for the fraudulent bankruptcy. And we know this, and that they were going to do it by a piece of paper that was found in Woodrow Wilson's effects in a note that was written to him by Colonel House, his handler. And I think we've got it on the website. I know it was in the book. It's a short paragraph relatively, and it starts out, "We will make them sureties by invoking the ancient pledge." That says some other stuff down there. And at the end, he says, well, if anybody ever figures this out, we've got plausible deniability. No, sorry, Colonel House and you slaving pieces of crap. You ain't got no plausible deniability. Sorry. Okay. What's the ancient pledge, Ken?
The feudal pledge.
Oath of fealty.
Feudal pledge. Yeah.
It's called the Oath of Fealty. You can see it in the Monty Python movie, Holy Grail. You can go read about it. This is when someone volunteered in the feudal system into voluntary servitude.
Yeah.
Now, when you did that, you went in to the Lord of the Manor and you knelt on both knees and you put your hands above your head as if you were praying. He put his hands over your hands. All the rest of the serfs from the manor were witnesses and surrounding the ceremony, and you would pledge your body and your worldly goods to the Lord of the Manor. Now, that's really interesting, okay? You're pledging your body as property. He's now got a property right in you, and your worldly goods. Why would you pledge your worldly goods to him?
Because everything you have is now his property. Look at it
this way. You're right, okay? But look at it this way. Now he has a property right in you, so you can't have a property right in anything, can you? Property can't own property.
There's your dialectic.
Okay? So you pledged your body and your worldly good. Now, if you want to verify this, go to Black's Law Dictionary, and what you want to look up is a term villain. We pronounce it villain. That's the English pronunciation. Don't forget it was brought over from Europe and France. So a lot of this stuff is Villein in Blacks. And if you go look at villain, you'll see a number of different kinds. It's different descriptions and whatnot. We think they're using the term villain regardant. And in the definition of villain regardant, it says a villain attached to the land, property, and transferable by deed. Birth certificate.
Typical.
Bond.
Typical serf.
Yep. Okay. Now, in that agreement, what you did in that ceremony was you entered a contract. It was a contract. It was witnesses. Okay. Now, this is one of those weird examples of, yes, it is contract. Okay. But it's a contract you've never heard of. You've never heard of a silent contract that runs generationally.
No.
Well, that's what this is. Because now you're the object of the Lord's property right. So when you and mama get amorous and have a child's born into the same condition. Mm-hmm. You can't own the child. He owns you. He owns the child. Just exactly as if you had a bull and a cow out in the back pasture and they had a calf. That calf's yours, isn't it?
It's just very interesting. You look on the U.S. passport application and it asks for your name of your parents. Are your parents U.S. citizens or not? That's
very interesting, and you're right. Okay, so let's get to it because that's part of their setup right there. All right. So this is a silent contract that runs generationally, and it doesn't matter if you're 8 generations away from the guy that joined into the condition. You get the opportunity to volunteer out because the whole thing's based on voluntary servitude. This is why they've got to recognize the affidavit.
Yeah, it's all about consent.
Okay, it is all. It's totally about you deciding what you want to do and who you are. Okay, so that's the underlying deal that's running on here. In 1933, in March, they put everybody, just like House said, in as sureties in this condition, utilizing the ancient pledge with these underlying ingredients. That's why everybody that's been born since March the 9th of 33 has been born into a condition of servitude. But what have they got to do to lock? Hold it. What have they got to do to lock you in? They got to get your agreement.
That's right. Just so long as you don't, rebut, you're fine.
And where's the linchpin? Where's the linchpin? And how do you do that? This is the linchpin of the whole thing right here.
Yeah.
What's the linchpin?
Linchpin.
Are you a citizen of the United States? Are you a resident?
Yeah.
Back to the 14th Amendment. Now you've agreed to the contract, even though you didn't know it was a contract and you didn't know you were in it.
Yeah.
But you agreed to it and you signed something your whole life, every time they ever ask you. Didn't you? Well, Ken ought to know what he is. He's a sharp guy. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. I can't help it if he can't interpret what I'm asking him.
Oh man, this stuff is it's frustratingly simple.
See, that's the thing that gets me. I tell you people, I say, look, this is not complex. It's simple. Yeah. It's simple. Where the confusion comes in is how they've jerry-rigged all these definitions and how they've enslaved you in your mind with dialectics. There's the key part. We're enslaved in our own minds because they're assigning opposite definitions that get implanted, Pavlovian conditioning, into our subconscious.
Right or wrong. And the other thing is that,
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other thing is that when you think about the law of contracts, no matter what way you want to be able to think about this conversation, when you think about contract and people staying in honor, you say, well, do I flat out disagree? No, you put in a counteroffer. We all want to stay in honor. We all want to be truthful about it, but we don't think about saying, why not just give a counteroffer and being a rebut,
Yeah, well, that's what the affidavit is. But it ain't an offer, it's a demand. It's your decision, which this is, because every man has the right of personal political self-determination. That comes from Vattel's Law of Nations. In other words, you get to decide what set of laws you live under. If they tell you you're living under a set of laws, that's tyranny, isn't it?
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
So that's why they've gone to all this trouble we've spent an hour on so they could ask you those two questions and get your agreement to their fraud. So you're going, in the first question, yep, I agree to your fraud. And in the second question, you're going, yep, I give you the consent to govern me in that condition.
Hey, Raj?
Yes.
I have the dissenting opinion by John Marshall Harlan.
Okay, please read it, because this is really eloquent, and I just love this guy.
Okay. The dissenting opinion was written by Justice John Marshall Harlan, who held that Congress was always bound to enact laws within the jurisdiction of the Constitution. This nation is under the control of a written constitution, the supreme law of the land, and the only source of the powers which our government or any branch or officer of it may exert at any time or at any place. He held that the Congress had no existence and thus had no authority outside the Constitution. He continued, the idea prevails with some, indeed it has expression in arguments at the bar, that we have in this country substantially two national governments, one to be maintained under the Constitution with all its restrictions, the other to be maintained by Congress outside and independently of that instrument. By exercising such powers as other nations of the earth are accustomed to. I take leave to say that if the principles thus announced should ever receive the sanction of a majority of this court, a radical and mischievous change in our system will result. We will, in that event, pass from the era of constitutional liberty guarded and protected by a written constitution into an era of legislative absolutism. It will be an evil day for American liberty if the theory of a government outside the supreme law of the land finds lodgment in our constitutional jurisprudence. No higher duty rests upon this court than to exert its full authority to prevent all violation of the principles of the Constitution.
He had it, man.
What was the date on that, Paul?
1901. Downs v.
1901.
Bidwell, 1901, the dissenting opinion by John Marshall Harlan.
If you go to Downs v. Bidwell in Wikipedia, it's got that site in there. Okay.
Yeah.
So he saw it 32 years before the event.
It's posted in all the chat rooms.
Okay. So
and
people
thank you,
have
Murray,
seen
your link is where I got it from.
These people could surmise what was happening, but they didn't understand the bankruptcy and they were going to pull the string. They had all the setup.
They had the setup. They didn't understand, or they didn't have a crystal ball to tell them what the bankers were going to use to force their hand and force it to happen.
And you see, here's where Jefferson said to fight tyranny, you got to have eternal vigilance. How do you have eternal vigilance against skullduggery, Talmudic bastards like this? That lie, cheat, steal, and enslave. How can you see what they're going to do 100 years advance from their intricate plan that was set up after the Civil War they caused to get those 2 amendments in the Constitution?
Well, they do it through generations, so nobody knows
they
from
do
one
it.
generation to the
Right.
next.
Exactly.
The only answer that's history.
You're talking about a gradualism. Okay, now let's finish this out because we're towards the end of the show. So in 1940, in the Nationality Act of 1940, that's over in the Organic Statutes at Large, okay, this is where, if you go look that legislation up, and they start the legislation with definitions, A, B, C, D, E, F, okay, whatever. The very first one, right underneath the heading of the act, a national owes total allegiance to a small S state. Right there, very first definition. Now, Ken, this is something that I've been able to figure out. Whenever they're pulling something major, they always put the hook at the very first. IRS 1.1-1A, Nationality Act 1940, that. 14th Amendment, all persons born. Those 3 words control the world when you understand this. Because that brings in the feudal system. Okay? So they always put the hook at the front. So that is there. And then about the third definition, there's a paragraph that I would challenge any attorney to regurgitate and define. And this is where they set up American Samoa and the states where they could pull it over into Title 8 in the code. And there's a statement in there. It says a national is someone born in American Samoa, Swains Island, or the outlying territories. Well, hold it. A non-citizen, this is in the statutes, this is in the code. A non-citizen national is someone born in American Samoa and Swains Island, not a national. So the only thing that could be left with deduction is that the outlying territories are the states.
You know, we haven't been able to find the term outlying territories. They replaced it with outlying possession.
Yeah, they did. In the Mrs. Robinson letter, she uses, there are no other possessions outside the outlying possessions. They don't use the word possessions. They use the word territory. Okay. So this is where they set up the hiding. Let me just finish because we're running out of time, Paul. This is where they set up the national and they set up American Samoan to hide it. Okay. Now, the big obstacle they had to overcome still was that case Plessy versus Ferguson to overcome the separateness but equality of the 2 political statuses. They did that in a case most of us are familiar with in some way, shape, or form called Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And the thumbnail for Brown, remember, is over busing, right? And the thumbnail description for Brown is equal in the classroom, equal in the society. What they did in some convoluted legal reasoning is they made people with God-given rights equal to people with man-given civil rights. Now, that's got to be tortured because I don't see any way those are equal. Okay. But in Brown, that's what they did. All right. Now, because both statuses are equal, they can ask you just the leading question. Are you a citizen of the United States? They don't ask you, are you a citizen of the United States or a national, do they? They ask you, are you a citizen of the United States? It's a leading question without full disclosure. Now, that was at the tail end of their plan. And the reason I know it is because as I stumbled into understanding this a while back, and I'm thinking 54, 54, 54. You know how your subconscious plays with you, Ken? 54, 54. What else happened in 54? Bam! And I went and looked it up. 60 days to the day after Brown versus Board of Education, they put the 1954 Internal Revenue Code in place, and we've been on it ever since. We've been under it. That's the end game. The tax issue is the key to this whole scheme. Without the taxes being extracted to pay the bondholders, they don't have a credit spout.
Hey, Raj.
Yes.
I've got a definition for people to chew on after the show. The 14th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Well, what definition of person are they using there?
Right.
If the definition of person is an entity to whom the law ascribes rights and duties.
Correct. And if you volunteer and answer those questions, you're ascribed civil rights that you were born with that you just affirmed.
Mm-hmm.
So what definition of person is the 14th Amendment using before it even sets it up?
Okay, well, it's already saying, and see, the first part of the legal test, they took care of themselves with the bankruptcy and putting everybody into the condition. So everybody born, but then you've got the second part, you've got to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That's why they ask you the questions that are in the original 14th Amendment.
Great show, Raj.
This was the best. Good stuff, man. Good stuff.
I'm going to tell you, these are some slick bastards we're dealing with right here, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one will be in the archives.
Okay, we're done. We're going to clip off the server. All right. Does that help you, Ken? Does that help you, Dimitri? Does that help you, Bama?
And there's another Saturday show to put in the on Expose the Matrix.
Wow.
See, it's simple. It's right in front of you. If you know these hidden legal definitions, if you understand about the feudal system, if you know your enemy and how they think, shit, it's simple.
You know, the problem is this was all taught in those original civics classes that we never had. How to understand the architecture of the system, so when you're trying to decode something like this, you know where to look. Everybody's forgotten, where do I look?
One of your best presentations, Roger.
Well, thank you, Joe. Well, even if they knew where to look, they might not find the right answer.
At least you would have the starting point of how do you start navigating the map if you don't know that you're dealing with a map of 16 different levels. Do you understand the commerce? Do you understand the word? Do you understand the acts? Do you understand the cases? And everything, when you look at engineering, you always, before you develop a product, you always do a whole series of trial runs and beta types and testing situations and all this kind of stuff so that you know when you actually deliver the final thing, it's going to work. But thankfully, what you brought up today is you've been talking about where was all these different little ideas tried out? Where was their experiment? Their sandbox, their experimental laboratory, and then you read those, and then you can derive the whole progress of development into the final product.
This goes back to Sun Tzu, really, okay? It only goes back a couple of thousand years, right? You got to know your enemy. And see, our people, here's the problem with people that I see like Anna and David. They don't know how our enemy thinks. They approach this and read things like they think. And you can't get the answer that way.
Roger?
You've got to know how these guys think and do things. Yes, Marco?
It all started with Roman civil law.
Yeah, and we could go into that. Won't do it today. But, you know, the beauty of this, Ken and Demetrius and Bama and the rest of you, Heather, and the importance of it. You know, people, you might be telling people, go, why do you want to do that? I don't want to do that. Well, the importance of this is there's only been two groups of people in the entire history of our planet that have ever had God-given rights. The first 200 years of Rome and the first 200 years of our country. If that doesn't bring the importance of it to you, there's nothing else I can tell you.
Roger, this is Sketch.
Yes, Sketch.
If we could get a flow chart, I'm not very good at flow charts, but if we get a flow chart of this show and how you explained it, it would help people immensely. You know, I'm just throwing it out there. If anybody can listen to this show and do a flow chart of the information, the concepts, I think it'll be very helpful. Thank you. And
well,
Paul,
you hit a key word right there, Sketch, and that's concepts. And for Ken and the new people, rather than go in and learn a bunch of minutia, you know, I say learn the information. Start with understanding the concepts. You alluded to it a minute ago, Ken. You got to learn about merchant law. What do you know about merchant law? Probably nothing. What do you know about the feudal system? Probably nothing. What do you know about the 14th Amendment and the Civil War and all that stuff? Not too much, probably. It's fought to free the slaves. So when you learn the concepts and how they interact, then you can go into the minutia and see what they're doing. The problem with our community is they're trying to arrive at the concepts by going through statutes and regulations where you got all these different definitions, hidden labels, and all this stuff. That's why our community's never had any success.
I kind of look at it and saying, if you're playing a 5D chess game, or if you're watching a 5D chess game, but you only know how to play 3D chess, the moves are not going to make any sense. You're just not going to understand it.
Well, it's like that basketball team out there playing the hockey team. You're going to lose every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long game.
Yeah.
And I want to thank Paul for putting icing on the cake there with the person question. That really helped a lot, I think.
Well, that person, everything revolves around that right there. That's why that our formula and understanding it and working with it a little bit is so damned important. No, Your Honor, what if Charlie Gray would have stood up in federal court and said, "You stupid ass district director, what do you know? A person is an entity to whom the law ascribes rights and duties. I'm ascribed no rights under the 14th Amendment. Therefore, I owe no correlative duties like your stinking income tax." But Charlie didn't know that information, and he just stood there silent, and it got him convicted.
In the moment, this all comes down to intimidation. Because
sure
when you're under the spotlight, that part of your brain that can think outside of the box gets terminated. It just turns off. And
well, that's why I preach this. If you get in this situation, I want you to regurgitate what I just told you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Just like Mike with that magistrate. We're not going to recognize this affidavit. Oh, okay. So you're automatically dispelling Vattel's Law of Nations, the United Nations Charter, an 1835 Supreme Court case which dictates whatever's in the possession of the secretary, if admissible in a court of law, is to be considered the higher and better evidence. And you're just throwing all that out the door there, ma'am? I guess you're just an open tyrant, aren't you?
Not to mention due process.
Okay. Listen, folks, we've got to have people learning this information and becoming re-empowered. It's the information that re-empowers you. It's the understanding. It's the confidence. It's all that stuff. You know, I was nervous as hell like everybody else that's new here at first, you know, and what I found was going to get that Florida State ID. Okay. the guy at the passport office, I had a Tennessee driver's license and I didn't want to present it because I knew it evidenced residency. So in the instructions, it says if you don't have a picture ID, Demetrius, you might want to pay attention to this. You can bring somebody that's known you for 2 years that does have one, and that suffices. Well, I caught an arrogant damn passport clerk. And he goes, well, I said, I had this girl with me. I said, well, that's why she's here, because I don't have an ID, and she does. Okay. And he turns around and picks up a big 3-inch 3-ring binder from the top shelf behind him and plops it on the counter. I mean, it made a no plop. Okay. And he goes through it for a minute and he goes, it says right here that I don't have to accept that, and I can make you go get one, and I'm going to make you go get one. He said it snotty, just like that. Okay. And she turns to me and she goes, well, I just got my kids' state IDs 2 weeks ago. Let's go get one of those. Boom, answer. So now it's a short distance to the driver's license division where they issue IDs, and we go in there. And at that point, I had my affidavit on file in the property records office there since 1992, last day of the year, 1992. I had a copy of that to include in with the passport application. I also had to have, this first time, I had to have a copy of my birth certificate. So I had the birth certificate and I had the affidavit filed in that county with the clerk of the court's stamp on it. Okay. And the gatekeeper there that makes sure you got the right documents sees that and he goes, sure, go on in. So I go down to the lady. There's 3 or 4 clerks doing IDs. And I didn't even say anything. I just put that 5-page affidavit up on the counter. Well, she grabs it, turns to the side 90 degrees, opens up a scanner, and starts scanning in the pages. And then she starts asking me the questions. Mr. Sayles, are you a citizen of the United States? No. Mr. Sayles, are you a resident? No. Where do you live? All the other questions. At the whole time, she's flipping pages on the scanner. And she goes, okay, Mr. Sayles, that'll be $4. Stand over there and get your picture taken. You could have blown me over with a feather. And the first thing that came to my mind was I said, I'll be damned. John was right. It's all voluntary.
And they all know it.
Well, the clerks don't know it. They just know they're supposed to ask you the questions. It doesn't matter what you answer them. They just know they got to ask you the questions.
That's right. Right. It'd be a blast to go through their training. It said,
I realized,
ignore what they say. Just make sure you ask the questions.
Right. And then, so all of a sudden you go, well, you start feeling empowered. Okay. And I go, well, now I was scared to go talk to bureaucrats before. And now, hell, I can't wait to find the next one. And you get up in front of him and you go through it and he does exactly what you want him to do. And you walk out going, holy smokes.
Just takes the first time to do it.
Yeah. You're getting a drink of water out of a fire hydrant right now, you new folks, but I'm simplifying it as much as possible. And like anything else, it's totally new to you. It takes a little bit of acclimation, but it's not difficult. It just takes a little work on your part, and it changes your thinking. Here's what's going on the main part of this, Ken and Demetrius and Bama and the other Heather, is they're using a process called equivocation. A listener called in and told me this. I didn't know it. Okay? Equivocation. Now, when you're trying to decide between several different options, you could be said to be equivocating, right? I'm equivocating between these options. But equivocation is a little different the way these guys use it. And if you go back and look in, this is interesting, in Webster's 1828 dictionary, when I went back and was researching this, and they give the definition of equivocation there. And at the bottom, he had personal notes. And the comment was This technique is often used by non-Christians to trick Christians. 1828.
Anybody.
Right. So what they're doing and how it works is they go in and take an 180 degree opposite definition to a word, a keyword, whereas it's the United States, whatever. And they then Pavlovianly condition your subconscious mind to the opposite definition. Now your subconscious mind controls 95% of your day, your conscious 5 to 10%. So now your conscious mind knows, but your subconscious mind overrules. So this is where it goes back to the biblical verse in the New Testament in James 1:8. A double-minded man is uncertain in all of his ways. It doesn't say some of his ways. It doesn't say part of his ways. It says all of his ways. And this is when your subconscious and your conscious are not working in tandem. So now that we know the technique, the remedy is very simple. You go back through, you find those key words, you substitute the correct definition instead of the opposite one, and now your conscious and your subconscious are working together. Now you're empowered.
That's the important every single time you think of a definition to also understand the counter of that definition.
Well, you see, Ken, this is one thing that's given me a great advantage, and it's been a detriment in some ways too, actually, and especially in learning Spanish, okay, is early on I didn't understand all this stuff, but I knew that they did everything in opposites. And so I started training my mind to always look at the dialectic first.
Yeah.
Okay. And I still think that way. I always look at the dialectic first. And it was great until I started to try and learn Spanish. And, buddy, it gave me fits. Because Spanish is opposite from English in many ways. So if you're going to learn Spanish, you got to learn this one hurdle. I had to go back and overcome the dialectic before I could face the main hurdle. And it gave me fits. Okay. But it did bring a very important thing into my life, which was the last Spanish teacher I had was an intellectual, real bright guy, married an American, lived in the States for 6 years out in Golden, Colorado. Hated it, moved back to Argentina, and was in a commune outside of town of shamans with no electricity and no hot water. And he lived out there for 5 years. Cold showers in the middle of winter. This guy's heart is driven steel. Okay. And so one of the girls, I was dancing tango and the girls wanted to talk and I couldn't speak Spanish. And they said, one of them said, well, look, this guy used to live in the States. He can teach you. So at this point, he's my 9th teacher or course. And I found a way I could learn, and I'm in interviewing teachers to see if they can teach me like this. And so when I went to sit down with Diego for the first time, I took a copy of my affidavit with him to try and show it to him and explain to him why I was having such a hard time, because I'd figured it out by then. And later on, we split. Well, I tell you what, this is true, man. We were having a class one day, and he gave me all this homework and stuff, and I was doing it, okay? I was really trying. And we were going to have the class instead of at his house, we were going to have it at my apartment. So he comes to the apartment, he walks into the apartment, he takes his books, he slams them down on the glass coffee table, and he goes, I won't be your Spanish teacher anymore because of the way your fucking mind works, and walked out the door. So we didn't have any interaction for a few years. And then I had an occasion to utilize his services again. And when we got back together and he said, you know, Roger, see, this guy had been studying power from the spiritual side for 20 years. I'd been studying it from the legal and technical side for 20 years, and our paths crossed. And later on, the second time we got together, and one of the early things he said, I want to tell you, when you gave me that affidavit and explained it to me, it increased my understanding 50 years.
Wow.
Okay.
Understanding of knowledge, understanding of law, understanding of language.
Of power, of how they implement their power. He knew what they did, he just didn't know how they implemented it. And one of the things he told me is he said, power always puts what they're doing to you right in front of you. Hell, it's on the back of the dollar bill, for God's sakes. It's right in front of us everywhere. You just hadn't been able to see it. I liken it to that example. Have you seen that with a white piece of 8.5 by 11 paper with fly written in black in the middle of it, and people flash it up to you and you can't read it? Your subconscious mind cannot see FLY in the middle of that page. Same type thing.
I've seen the videos where you have like these two people having a conversation, and then some guy comes in this like gorilla costume, and he's like waving, and most people will not see that. The whole video is like maybe a minute or two long, and you're like, you have to stop and re-look at this thing 2 or 3 times to actually find it. It's amazing.
Right. Well, those are all examples of what we're talking about here. Okay. So anyway, and I won't get into it now because I'm going to go have lunch with somebody, my buddy Walt.
Hey, Roger.
And I've got the Holy Grail too, Roger. And it came out of these. Yeah, hold on just a second. It came out of this second round with Diego, who I call Gandalf, and I'm not going to go into the story. Last time I was talking about it on the air, somebody wrote me and said, "You shouldn't talk about that shit. You drive listeners off." Hell, this is the crux of it, man. Okay. Yes. Who was Hey Roger in there?
Oh, that was me, Roger. I wasn't sure if you could hear me. I need to just ask you a quick question. I get this. This is huge what you did. Letting people understand that, they're volunteering into something, and how they're bound, they could be unbound. But you're telling them the key point, and I appreciate this. The question I have for you is, when you send in your affidavit, the citizenship affidavit, do you put your Social Security number on it?
You can. If you got a common name, especially, just to make sure they identify it with the right person. Social Security is not a nexus to the system. That's more Patriot mythology. You feel free to use it. Or if you don't want to use it, you could put in place of birth and date of birth and use the last 4 digits of the Social Security number.
Okay.
But all you're trying to do is differentiate and make sure they get this paperwork assigned to the correct person in their records.
That's the only reason for it. Okay. And then you have the cover letter. I have the 4 digits, or I could put the 4 digits or the whole number. But the 4 digits is fine. The other question.
You want to put...
Hold it. You know what? Hold it. Ho. You don't want to put that in the cover letter. You want to put it on the affidavit under your signature.
Oh, not on the cover letter. Okay. So the other question is then.
Hold on. Mer's got something. She's chomping at the bit to get in here. Mer.
Well, I'm just saying, and maybe you're considering it just common sense, but you put the X's for the first part of the social, and then just the 4 digits.
You could do that.
Okay,
what you're trying to achieve is to make sure this is assigned to the right person in the records. Okay.
Right. I did that originally, but I put the whole number in, and I'm like, you know what? I have it both ways now, where I have the Social Security number, a place for it. When I get it notarized, I had the 10 of them notarized originally, which I'm just apprehensive of bringing it in. I just want to get it right. That's all. I'm not worried about doing it. I'm going to take them on. Yeah.
Well, there is a danger of people misusing your Social Security, and you are giving other people notice, and it could be floating around out there. So certainly a consideration.
So the last 4 digits is fine. The other thing is, when I put the address in, okay, I put my first, middle, and last name, my Christian name, and then my family name, right? And then care of, is that correct? Care of, and then the address?
Don't worry about the address thing. Just put where you live.
Oh, okay. Zip code and all?
More Patriot mythology. Okay.
Okay, cool. All right, good. All right, okay. That's all I wanted to make sure of. So none of that's care of, and then, Illinois Republic,
now,
USA.
Do you know where that came from? From the guy that just recently Well, it's a guy that recently died. He was an actor, the one that had the orangutans in Every Which Way But Loose. They did a seminar in Georgia years ago, and they were the ones, they said, this is how they're achieving jurisdiction. You've got a mailbox on your property. A mailbox is federal property, so that jurisdiction extends to you and the land. Total bullshit.
Oh, good. Oh, beautiful. Okay, because that was a little confusing. I'm like, wait a minute. Something about
the federal.
regions.
Let me share this with you. The federal jurisdiction is inside your mailbox, not the outside.
Ah, that's good. All right. Okay, good. I'll have it chopped off tomorrow.
And I put date of birth and place of birth, but not your current address.
They're
going to have to see that. I mean, in that one, on the affidavit itself, it doesn't have to have that, I don't think.
On the affidavit itself, number 6 or number 5, it showed the Department of State document certifies non-citizen nationality located, and it has the HPP level.
No. Non-citizen nationals are only American Samoans.
Just put national.
Roger, he just needs to go to the matrix docs.
So I should get rid of the non-citizen. That was on.
Well, are you an American? Are you an American Samoan?
No.
Well, then that's not you.
I'm not.
Roger, I think he's using a different affidavit, not yours. So
it sounds like it. I don't have numbers. All I got is 2 paragraphs. They're very short. They're very succinct. They're very accurate. They're very to the point. One of them is for the State Department. The second one's for IRS.
Where are your instructions coming from? I'm just curious. Where are they coming from?
Not everything is correct on the Presley video. Not everything.
Okay, all right. So then I'm just going to go to the matrix. Would I be able to get it off of your website, Roger, or no?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Then I'm not going to. Okay, I'm so glad I asked. I just been waiting the whole time. I don't want to interrupt on you guys because you guys were talking about.
Well, this is for you and Ken and the new people. Forget everything you've learned and relearn it correctly.
Everything's on the matrix docs, and FAQs on matrix docs explains how to word your affidavit too, and the copy is on the matrix docs.
Beautiful.
It's very simple.
Okay, that's I just want to get this right. I kind of saw a non-citizen thing. Wait a minute, that would take me completely out. But I didn't want to question it, but I'm glad I did. Okay, so that saved me again, Roger.
And the less you have on there is the less for them to rebut.
Okay, all right. So that'll just have to do all of it. Okay.
I mean, literally, all you're doing here is see everybody want. Can I use this word? Can I use that word? All you're doing is rebutting a fraudulent presumption. You can do it.
I don't know how they were able to. I don't. Go ahead.
You can do it. But the less you say, just think of it this way. The less you say, the less they have potentially to rebut. Right?
Okay, but they didn't give full disclosure on what they did originally. I don't know if that's legal.
So, well, that's part of why they have to recognize it, because it's fraud.
Okay, well, all right. So, that answers the question then.
Fraud vitiates any contract ab initio. If there's fraud involved, the contract is negative and negated from when it started. That's why when you file this, you're running back to pre-March the 9th of 1933, before the fraud.
Okay, I thought it was. Oh, you said 1942. That was the.
That was. No, that was the Nationality Act of 1940, where they set forth and changed state citizen to national, and hid and set up hiding national state citizen behind non-citizen national American Samoan.
Okay, that's what they did with that. Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to go off of your Matrix website and get your affidavit and just plug in my name. Now, would I be putting all three names? That's I'm asking you. The Christian name and my family name, or is it just the whole name?
I'd put your full name in there.
Okay,
Rod.
Okay.
That's another way that they can easily identify it with the right person. Samuel?
And the last 4 digits of the social.
No, this is sketch. I just wanted to tell this fellow to try and, I know we all know you want to become free quickly, but you should do it slowly and methodically, like a turtle, not a rabbit, and learn the concepts, learn what you're doing.
No, I understand how they did the fraud. I understand that they put in the word they in the 14th Amendment and are subject to, and not and, which places you in a position where they're at. No,
they don't use are, because then they'd be tyrants. They use and.
No, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, you're right, and right. So you have to have both of those situations to be in their jurisdiction. And if you don't have the second one, then you're not. Then you could pull yourself out.
Well, you're not. If you don't have the second one, you're not subject to the jurisdiction.
Right, you're not subject to the jurisdiction. That's correct. Okay, yeah. Now I get it. I'm just a little nervous again, Raj.
I know. Well, you're new. And I think sketches, that's why I say, and we're at a time where we've got it simplified. Somebody could do the paperwork, but I want you to make the personal commitment to yourself that you're going to learn the information if you do that. What we don't want is a bunch of people taking the paperwork and filing it and not doing anything else. I'll give you an example. I heard of a kid running around going, I'm a non-resident alien.
Okay.
What do you think? What do you think people that heard him make that statement thought?
Thought he was nuts.
This guy's full of shit. He's from another friggin' planet. Well, he's not wrong. He is a non-resident alien, but only in the tax code.
Right. Yes. For the IRS. Yes. I know that. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's what I don't want, is people that don't understand the information fucking it up for us.
You have to be out of their. You got to be out of their possession. The United States is a corporation, and they've drawn everybody into being their. I want to say slaves, but they're workers. I kept asking the same question. I had an FEIN number. I said, what is that? That's a federal employer index number. I said, I don't work for the government. Why do I have this number? I kept asking this question. Nobody could tell me anything.
No.
Again, I don't know how they come out of my property without my permission.
Here again is part of our problem, is when you go up to somebody and say, do you know your property of the federal government? And all they relate to when you say the word slave is black slavery. Okay? And they go look in the mirror and they go, well, hell, that's me. I've been looking at that reflection my whole life. I ain't black and I ain't a slave. Because they told me I was free. This is the English
British slavery system. Right.
This is the English variety of slavery.
Yeah.
See, they didn't have black. England's got a free soil doctrine that goes back hundreds of years. No one born in England is a slave. And there's been court cases on that with black slaves. Okay. So when they came over and brought the feudal system with William the Conqueror, they couldn't bring in involuntary servitude from Europe because England's got a free soil doctrine. So they only brought the voluntary side over. And they called it, in the old English jurists, very accurately, I think, labeled it the unfree.
Okay. The unfree.
That's why understanding this thing on property, because our people don't understand that. You've heard people refer to property as property rights, but you don't know that property is property rights, and whatever the object is a thing legally. So it's these little levels of technical versus colloquial is another way they've bamboozled us.
Maybe there's a real simple way to enhance the affidavit. And so you have the subject line, U.S. citizen, and then you have 2 words that say, no, thank you, signed.
Well, my personal feeling is to make and keep it as simple and concise as possible. They hadn't ever objected to one. They may have others, people, I don't know. But I know they can't object to this because it's your choice, and the simpler you make it, the more effective it is, and the less they've got to come back at you on, potentially.
How about your name and then? How about your name and then no contract?
Well, that travel.
That's what the first paragraph says.
Oh,
I, Sam, Illinois, do solemnly swear under the penalty of perjury of the laws of the United States of America, my intent to be a national with God-given, constitutionally protected capital R rights and not a citizen of the United States in a condition of voluntary servitude under the scope and purview of the 14th Amendment. That's that first paragraph verbatim.
Wow, you got it down, Patton. Okay. All right.
Comment.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just don't want. I'm glad I asked. So I was just about to send it in too.
Comment.
I'm glad I hit it.
Okay. Comment from Joe.
What you're saying reminds me of when I took business law in college, and they were on the subject of wills and testaments, and the professor spoke of the most simple will, and it was tested in court and found to be valid. All to marry. 3 words.
There you go. Yep.
Keep it simple. And there's another line I'm sure you've heard with regard to what they throw at us. If you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit.
Well, see, here's the problem in our community is we got these people that have been studying it for a long time and interested in it, and they've studied a whole bunch of stuff, and now they want to show you what they've learned.
They think they've got a friggin' PhD.
I'm pro-per and pro-nunc-K-sunk and all. Don't do that.
Right.
You don't need to.
Right. Make it simple.
But let me just ask a quick question.
Okay.
This is Demetrius. Since the gentleman just brought up about the will, wouldn't this also affect how probate is done?
Yeah. Well, our suggestion is you got stuff use trusts, and then there is no probate.
Right. Got you. And I believe in that too.
So,
hey, Roger, take the government out of your affairs.
Hold on. We got Gary. He's stopped swinging his hammer for a minute to say something. Hey, Gary.
I'm not swinging a hammer today, Roger. I'm turning wrenches. I'm changing a hub assembly on one of my vehicles.
Okay.
Hey, for all the new people that are trying to understand stuff, there's 2 pages of court cases. I think they're on the website. You need to download those 2 pages and read those 2 pages with the information you've gleaned today until you understand what they're saying. They even say, one court case even says you're in interstate commerce as soon as you leave Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
unless you were born in Washington, D.C. and still live there, you left Washington, D.C. in their imaginary world. So read those 2 pages.
You're leaving their jurisdiction, right?
Well, I told y'all that we had a patriot in Atlanta that went up there, and when they're leaving D.C. and driving back to Atlanta, as they get to Virginia, there's one of those green signs, and it says, "You're leaving the United States."
Wow.
10 square miles.
But as long as But as long as you're a U.S. citizen or claim to be, you're still in the jurisdiction of D.C., administered by Nancy Pelosi of the House of Representatives.
And why is that, Gary? Why is that? Because that word there is in the 13th Amendment.
Because you volunteered into it.
Well, they volunteered you into it, and you agreed to it, to be more technically precise. So what you're doing with the affidavit is you're taking away your agreement. You're taking away your consent, which is your capital R right.
Yeah, I know. Once you leave the D.C. area, you're doing commerce. I get that. 100%. And actually, that one video was very good that Presley had. He explained the 13th and 14th very well, just like you did, Roger. But again, I got to look at these court cases which you're talking about, right? And understand that.
And I will, we've heard a rumble or two that people looked at one or two of the sites and couldn't find the site. So I'm not sure, and I've never shepherdized them, but I got to feel they're probably correct, okay? But somebody one of these days can shepherdize those sites and see if they exist, and if they don't, we'll get that site out of there.
Yeah, I have that site. I don't. If I could send it to you, I will. I'll have my son send it through the email. Let's see if I can. I still have it, so.
Okay. Well, I don't know which one you're referring to, but anyway, anybody got anything else for me today?
Roger, I know you've got to go eat, and I'll send it in the mail, but just for future reference, who Benjamin's wife was.
She was a slave. She was a slave.
No, she wasn't. No.
Oh, she wasn't?
No. Well, let me see. Do I have it real handy here to tell you? I think I do. Let me scroll back just a second. Come on.
Awesome show today, Roger.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa.
Very complete.
Yes, thank you, Roger. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
very much for what you do.
Yeah,
Well,
thank
let's see.
you. This was a blast.
Yeah, he
Always, my
was
friend.
from Louisiana,
Always
and he
kudos
went
to you, man. I appreciate it so much.
yeah.
Thank you, Demetrius.
Yeah, so he was teaching English to French-speaking people. In return, one of the students, Natalie Boucher de Saint Martin, a daughter from a prominent local Catholic family, whom he soon wed. So that was the wife, right? And apparently, I don't know. Then they went to Paris, and he'd visit once a year or whatever. He was apparently impotent. Well, he was queer. Sorry.
Could have been.
And he's fat. He couldn't even ride a horse.
Okay.
This is a sketch. 125 years after Plessy versus Ferguson, the descendants were at a ceremony in Louisiana, and he was pardoned by the governor.
Good. I think that's what that article that Lauren found was about.
I sent her an email just in case she can jump on and say hi one day.
But, see, it wasn't a black-white issue. It's a political status issue.
Yep.
And they covered it up by using black and white.
Yes. Well, you see, they're looking 100 years ahead, Demetrius, because they know they're going to pit you and your folks against me and my folks.
Exactly. And that's what they're still doing today.
Well, that's why I welcome you black folks so open-armedly. You got to get in and teach the black community what's going on. John used to say from the podium, if we could free the black man, we could free us all. But you see, that's not right. We got to go in and free the white man and be able to free the black man finally.
Hell, I'm still having trouble teaching white folks.
Well, hell, you're just a damn slave anyway.
I saw this years ago, man. I saw it. I didn't understand it all, but I knew that they took the slavery system, just like they always do. When they find something that works, they'll take it and they'll implement it over everything else.
I should play one day.
Man,
I've got an audio of a David Duke video called "The History of Jewish Slavery." It's on the website, on the archive somewhere. Maybe it's only about 20 minutes long. Maybe one day this coming week I'll play it for you guys. These are history slavers, folks. They've always been in this business. Slavery is the single most profitable business in history.
Yes. Yes.
May I ask Ken? May I ask Ken a
Yes,
question?
ma'am.
The Ken that was on here
Yes.
most of the day.
Yeah.
Hey Ken. Does Amazon rights mention feudal system and or Jews, slavers?
She probably not. I think she is Jewish.
Oh, she may be, but she's German, and she always goes back to when she was young, and the kids would pick on her to call her a Nazi or whatever, so she's afraid to talk about Jews. But then she said she was against the Catholic Church, and apparently that's not true either.
Well, what I've heard, she's got a direct connection to the Pope.
That's what I'm saying.
Is it Reitz or Reitzinger? I'm just
Right,
saying.
all I've ever heard.
It's
Yeah.
I think it is Reitzinger, but she cut it back.
Yeah, she cut it short.
Anyway,
R-E-I-T-Z-I-N-G.
I like to think that everybody that's trying to do something in this area is doing the best of their ability. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I'd like to think. It makes the world nicer for me. Okay.
Hey, Demetrius, you might go and do a search for an article called "We Thought They Were White."
We thought
Dontel Jackson.
they were white.
Yep, Dontel Jackson, right, Brent?
And Demetrius, I'll tell
so.
you, I've been trying to penetrate the black community for years. Okay. I had somebody I used to get on and say, please, somebody get this information to Louis Farrakhan. A guy contacted me from D.C. His cousin is the head of security for Louis Farrakhan. They stay at his house when he's in D.C. I know the information got to Louis Farrakhan because he told me he gave it to his cousin. But Louis has chosen not, whether he's too old or doesn't quite I can't imagine he doesn't understand it. But regardless, nothing has ever come out of that. But you see, if we got a bunch of the black folks understanding this and standing up, can you see the mayhem in their agenda? I mean, technically, Brent and Demetrius, you guys are now white. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Hey, Roger.
Oh, Lordy, what am I going to do?
Hold on there, son. You's a white man. According to the United States Code, Title 42, Section 1983 and 1986, a citizen of the United States is equal in the privileges and immunities to the white citizens.
Another example of the man keeping us down.
Okay?
Another example
So
of
now
a
you guys,
man keeps
so-
trying to uplift the white man.
yeah, and so now we can meet Demetrius or Brent and go, God, look at that whiteness. That's a devil. That's a white devil right there.
Hey, somebody, you mean Brent's black? Man, I didn't know that.
He's the white sheep.
Demetrius too.
Hey,
Don't leave
Roger.
him or mom. Don't leave Mississippi Mama out of this, for God's sakes. She's up there having chili at Cotacachi today. Yes.
Yeah, Roger. William,
Yeah, I
Georgia.
know.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I was wondering, this is William in Georgia. I was just wondering, where does the current U.S. citizen stand with the prospect of trading with the enemy and, the War Powers Act and all that?
Well, you're totally outside of that. You're no longer in the emergency when you file the affidavit. See, that's what Gene Schroeder, and that's what Gene missed here, Joe. I'm not criticizing him. He, at the end, says, well, if you get a president in there, sign one executive order, this all goes away. he didn't know and understand we can do it individually and make it go away.
Right.
Case in point. Yeah. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for
All right.
that, Roger. That was great.
Yeah, good show today. I'm enjoying doing it.
Roger,
Yes, Marka.
I wonder if Schroeder knows now. Maybe he heard something. You mentioning it. I don't know if he's.
Well, I don't know. Joe, have you gotten our information to Dr. Schroeder?
He is, well, let me say this. Andy and Paul both made contact with one of the researchers that wrote the War and Emergency Powers book and did the research on it.
Right.
They're trying to establish some communication. And that's all I'll say for right now.
Okay. Well, hopefully they should be able to understand it fairly easily. Okay.
Well,
with the knowledge they've got.
But, I'll say this: there are stumbling blocks that are kind of thrown in front of people to get to him. So I'm not going to say more. That's it.
Okay. Well, at this point, the SWs, some will, some won't. So what? Go find somebody that's receptive that the information resonates with. That's the only path I've been able to take. I'm not going to sit there and argue with somebody. I'm not going to get in a room with David Strait and Anna Von Reitz and try and present my stuff and hear all of their objections, because those people, especially Strait, see, he's not in a position to change horses. He's had a whole bunch of people that have paid him money that he's now going to have to go back to and say, hey, I was wrong.
Roger, please don't misunderstand. It's not that Gene would not be receptive to this.
Oh, right. I'm sure that.
Yeah.
I hope you can understand where you can read between the lines and leave it at that for right now. I think we'll make the contact.
Okay, well, if he gets to him and he understands it, great. And if he doesn't, it's great too. He gave us a wonderful research that verifies everything we're saying and puts it into a little different form, really.
Joe, I appreciate you sharing what you did right now, and I know that Schroeder would appreciate learning Roger's stuff if it ever gets to him.
I think it will, and like I say, Andy and Paul have communicated with one of the researchers who I communicate with quite frequently, but Paul and Andy are much better at explaining and going forth with what we're trying to do here.
Now, let's take what we've covered and what you people know and understand, and let's transpose just a bit. Can you imagine the effect of this if, hypothetically, we can get on Alex Jones and present it to that audience? At this time, as effective as this is, as in a precarious position as our enemies are in, folks. These guys are getting hit with getting uncovered from every angle right now.
Trump is live at the Iowa State Fair.
Oh, good.
The War and Emergency Powers presentation from Gene Schroeder had 1,060 views a week ago. It's already to 1,270. So it has picked up more views in 1 week than any other video I've ever produced or presented.
Fantastic. I hope some of that comes from last week on Thumper's show.
I'm hoping.
I guarantee you some of it came from that. Okay.
Wait, which video was that?
War and Emergency Powers.
Yeah, Joe has it on his Rumble too.
Joe, have you watched that yet?
I've been sharing it.
No.
No, Jersey Joe. Have you watched that yet?
No.
You need to.
Are you kidding? Wow.
You have it.
It's very important.
Joe, you have it posted on 1776er.
I do? Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's on there.
Losing track of what I got on there. What I have on?
I shared your video too, Paul, with Rumble, like the other Rumbles that we've been kind of contacting.
It will show you how they did everything behind the scenes to set up the switch. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and Raj, seeing as I've already got a couple of F-bombs to edit out of the archives,
Sorry.
do you have like a flashing neon light or anything like that on the wall? You know, is there any way that okay, well, if there's any way that you can imagine yourself sitting in a titty bar and having a lap dance and having to sit on your hands instead of constantly tapping on the table, that would be very helpful.
Well, I've got the handkerchief up there now, so.
Not helpful.
Sorry. You know, I try consciously, being a broadcaster since my early 20s, not cross the Garland line. But when we click off the server, to me, it's us girls here. Okay, so sorry for the language. Otherwise than that, I'm going to lunch. I'm going to lunch. Does anybody have
girls and everybody on Global Voice?
Blessings, everybody.
Yeah, okay.
Been a pleasure.
Have a good lunch, Roger.
Okay, thanks.
So
yeah, and I welcome all you new people, really do, and you're the lifeblood of what we do, and I'm particularly impressed with the quality of Kit, Demetrius, and Heather, and Bama, and the other new people that are coming. And I don't know what you guys are going to do with this. All I can do is teach you, just like John Benson taught you. And then whatever you're going to do with it is going to be an internal motivation, and go out and see how the information moves you. See, it's not me. It's got to be the information. The information is what has to take control there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thanks, Raj. Great show. And the link to the archive is already on the new Students Begin Here page on exposedthematrix.com.
Okay. Well, good show. I'm glad that came up yesterday, and I like doing these kind of shows because they're just so educational. They make light bulbs go off for people, you know, and that's what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Roger. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Roger.
You mentioned my name a couple times. This is Bama, and I didn't want to interrupt anything because it was such a great show, and I was just here to listen and learn. So I really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Well, you know, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, Bama. What does that tell you?
You're supposed to listen.
I'll see y'all Monday.
Thank you, Roger.
I love each and every one of you.
I love you too, Raj.
Sending you a hug.
Thank you, Roger. We love you, buddy. We do.
Okay.
Thank you, Roger.
Roger, we know how valuable you are. Because if you weren't, we wouldn't be here on a Saturday listening to you. We'd be in the sun or at the lake or sea doing or doing whatever. So this is important to me, and I know it's important to everybody else. And we love you and we trust you. So thank you.
Okay, kids.
We thank God.
I'll see y'all Monday.
I'm with another man on a weekend, and it's not my husband. Hi, Roger. Frankie.
I didn't hear that. I was busy vacuuming.
Hey, Ron. Hey, Frankie.
That's your job.
We love you, Roger, and today was absolutely awesome.
You know, you can be enslaved several ways, you know.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
Hey,
okay. We're still streaming, everyone. Come on.
I gotta go. I'll see you later. Ciao.
Bye.
All right, catch you later.
Bye,
And
guys.
I think I'm going to get this stream off of here before we really get in trouble. This has been the Radio Ranch with Roger Sayles on Eurofolkradio.com and radio.globalvoiceradio.net. For more information on the topics discussed or an archive of this program, you can find the link on exposethematrix.com. Exposethematrix.com. You'll find it on the New Students Begin Here link. It's in red, lower right-hand corner of the upper portion of the main page. We're also on HomeNetwork.tv and FreedomNation.tv Monday through Friday. We're here on EurofolkRadio.com and radio.globalvoiceradio.net Monday through Saturday from 11 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And, well, that's about it. I think today has been one for the books. It's been one for the record books for certain. And I appreciate everybody who joined us on this weekend. Now, go forth and be entertained with your free time. This is Global Voice Network. Catch you later.
Keep walking, keep on your toes, and don't stop talking about freedom. You get going, lots to be learning, lots to be knowing about people. Gotta reach them, see them right down, then you gotta teach them about freedom. Gotta win it, gotta put yourself smack dab in it. Hey, tomorrow, hey, go away. All the freedom.
Wrong. Forward moving and focused on freedom. You're listening to the Global Voice Radio Network.
Bye-bye, boys. Have fun storming the castle.